Welcome to CSP 372, Chapter 2, Approaches to Learning and Teaching. So we're going to put on our thinking caps and think a little bit about thinking and how we teach children to think and the learning processes that are necessary for them to learn to think. We'll talk about 3, even 4 strategies that your book mentions: applied behavior analysis, cognitive strategy instruction, sociocultural theory, and schema theory. Now, what I'll be sharing with you is a different version than what's in your book, and so what I expect you to do is to listen and look at the graphics that are in this presentation and then go back and apply it to what your book says. You'll have activities that will require you to use both the video and the book to complete those activities. So first we're going to look at applied behavioral analysis. When we look at applied behavior analysis, what we look at is 7 dimensions that are indicative that we're using behavioral analysis or behaviorism. In general, what we're looking at is we want to help people to generalize to new environments and new participants. And so in other words, what we're trying to get them to do is to take what they learn and use it in different places. It's applied, and what that means is that the behavior that we're using, the procedure, is significant to that person. So in other words, we're training them things that are going to be used in their setting for the activities that are expected in their day. It's going to be conceptually systematic. So what that means is that we're going to use procedures and outcomes that are congruent with basic principles of behavior. So in other words, we know that if you reward somebody, they're more likely to repeat a behavior. If you punish somebody, they're less likely to repeat a behavior. People learn from watching other people, modeling. And so all of those are part of the behavioral principles. Applied behavior analysis is also analytic. What we look at is the functional relations between behavior and the environmental variables. In other words, what is it in that setting that is that causes the person to be more likely to do a behavior or less likely to do a behavior? So we talk about antecedents, what happens right before the behavior. When we look at antecedents, what we're saying is that I'm more likely to behave this particular way when this person's in the room. Or I'm more likely to behave in this way if you say a particular thing to me, or if you make a particular gesture, or if you give me a particular cue. That's going to be antecedents. And then we look at consequences. What happens immediately after the behavior? Because consequences are going to determine what I believe is going to happen. And I'm going to act the way I act based on what I believe will happen as a result of my behavior. The behavior is the target of the modification itself. Now that seems obvious, but what applied behavioral analysis requires us to do is to specify what do we want the person to do, to say, to write. We're not looking at changing the way they think or they feel. We're looking at external observable behavior. We want the change to be effective. We want it to be significant to the participant so it makes a difference to them. We want their behavior to be cost effective. Now, we don't necessarily mean money there, but the cost to the person. Efficient and probable to be generalized and maintained. In other words, will they use it in multiple settings, and will they use it over time? And the other thing we want to do is we want to use procedures that are precisely described and allow for replication. So that was applied behavior analysis. Now we're going to look at cognitive strategy instruction. So when we talk about cognitive strategies, what we're talking about is taking what we know, what we can imagine, how we can organize, and how we can respond in various ways. We're going to do task-based strategies. So in other words, there'll be some strategies that are good for reading. There'll be some that are good for math. There's some that are good for both. When we talk about metacognitive strategies, we're talking about learning, knowing about knowing. When we talk about metacognition, we're talking about planning and monitoring and managing and evaluating our own behavior so that we can problem solve. So what do I know? What is my background? What inferences can I make? What predictions can I make? How do I personalize my learning? How do I transfer learning to different subjects? How can I substitute or paraphrase information? In imagination, how can I make images to help me remember things? How can I use real objects for role play? Organizational skills, recognizing patterns, putting things in groups, classifying, using graphic organizers, taking notes, summarizing, selective attention, knowing what to look at. And then last, the variety of resources. How can I access other information about the same thing? The example you have here is you're watching this video, but you also have your textbook, and then in your activity I'll send you even other places. How to cooperate with other people to learn, how to talk yourself through it. So we did applied behavior analysis, we did cognitive strategies. Now we're going to look at sociocultural theory. Remember Vygotsky? So this is Vygotsky. What we want to do is we want to start with the activity. What do I want to accomplish in a lesson? What do I have to do to make it happen? What will my students be doing if they're accomplishing it? Starting with the basics. Then I'm going to expand to what concepts or understandings do I want them to have as a result of this lesson, and how can I help them understand it? How will I know if they understand it? And then processes. What processes do I want them to practice and develop? How will I help them develop these processes? How will I know if they're developing them? Disposition. So we're moving from the concrete to a broader sense of concrete and looking at content. We're looking at application in the processes. Then in dispositions, we're moving into how we feel about things and how we act on things. So what habits or dispositions of mind do I want them to use and develop, like scientific thinking or work habits? How can I assist in them developing these work habits or this scientific process? How can I know if they're developing these things? And how does what they know today compare with my vision of where they could be? So what are my aspirations for them, and how do I help them develop aspirations? And then states of mind. In which of the states of mind do we wish our students and colleagues to become more resourceful as a result of this series of lessons? So I'm going from knowing something on a concrete level, going in more depth in that content, being able to do something with the content, being able to feel and act on that content, and then to be able to take that content and apply it to my greater world. What am I going to do to empower students to do these things? How am I going to know if they're empowered? And then, how do we know what we do today compares with our vision of what could be? And so we're looking again at the future. What does this lead to? What does this connect to? It's all about connections. So we did applied behavior analysis, cognitive strategy theory, sociocultural theory, and now we're going to look at schema theory. This comes out of Piaget. So what we're looking at here is, how do we know what we know? So what we have is we have input through our senses, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile, and that information, that input goes into our working memory so that we can manipulate the information. It also goes into our identification knowledge. In other words, it connects to the things we already know that we've already experienced. And then that working memory goes to elaboration. What else do we know? It goes to execution. What am I going to do about it? And then it goes to planning. What needs to be done and how should it be done? And then this planning knowledge and this execution knowledge leads to output. And so what we do with schemata is that we're going to help children build, when they have this working memory, we're going to help them to elaborate on this, dip into their identification so that they understand where it connects to other things, and then teach them how to make a plan and then figure out who's going to do this plan and how it's going to work. So this is a brief overview of cognitive processes, of learning styles, of teaching styles that we're going to use as we go deeper into our planning in this semester.